So Mother of Rune's important only if it's in a Stoneforge Mystic, or is it just that just great all over?
It's pretty good no matter what, but you definitely want to back it up with Stoneforge Mystic. That's the draw that's really hard to beat.
It's going to be turn 1. Fetch for David. And this is actually a pretty heavy creature version of Burn that I'm looking at Coffey's list. 4 Goblin Guide, 4 Grim Lavamancer, 4 Eidolon, and 2 Monastery Swift Spear.
I tend to like, going only up to 11, sometimes less than that. Oliver with 13.
We see there the turn 1 Mother of Runes was the play for David. Oliver spent a Lightning Bolt on it. We'll go back to McDarby. He has a 2-drop. We'll see just which one it is. So if it is Mother of Runes into Stoneforge Mystic, even if Oliver has both of the removal spells, you're saying it's bad.
Unless the removal spell is Searing Blaze, then things are more or less fine. Thalia is not pleasant either, but not nearly the same level of pressure.
Yeah, Thalia the play. If you look at McDarby's hand, it is a 3rd land and a triple copy of Swords to Plowshares. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but if Oliver has a burn-heavy hand, that seems like a great situation for Oliver.
Well, it kind of is. The Thalia becomes problematic, and he's got to get that off the table first. So David's hand's pretty good no matter what. He would definitely prefer to play against creatures rather than spells because of all the Swords to Plowshares, but this is a really good opening for David.
And we see there, Mountain the play for Oliver. Looks like Ben personally red bordered on the card. And Grim Lavamancer is going to be the play for Oliver. That's an excellent answer to Thalia. It is 2 creatures, though, into a hand full of Swords to Plowshares for David.
Yeah, this is a turn that David's definitely happy with. Doesn't really have to care that much about the Swift Spear. Can get the Lavamancer off the table. Can follow it all up with Deathrite Shaman, too.
Deathrite Shaman, the draw there. We'll see how David proceeds. But right now, keeping his life total very high as Oliver's hand gets lower on cards.
David McDarby, a very popular content producer, 4starcitygames.com, does a lot with the Commander format. Loves Magic of all sorts, competitive or casual. And I think a lot more skilled than maybe the public knows about here in the top 4.
Yeah, had a great showing yesterday with Teamer, now with Maverick. One of the things I like about his style is, and you can see this from players who make the transition from multiplayer and these kind of formats, is that he's really not afraid to play his own personal archetypes or things that he thinks are fun or a certain style of deck, not sleeving up Jeskai Stoneblade because he thinks it's the best.
And he's, had a lot of success, not top 8 success, but with Karn, Jace, Liliana, Planeswalker control decks in Legacy. So he can go pretty far outside the box.
Well, Swords to Plowshares will take down the Grim Lavamancer, and Deathrite Shaman will follow it up. David staying at a healthy 17. We'll pass to see what Oliver has in store for him. Looking at his hand, we see cards like Price of Progress, Goblin Guide. Decent number of red spells. I believe Rift Bolt among them. And while David's tapped down, looks like Oliver's going to go for Goblin Guide here. Card in the face of Thalia, not always good for a lot of damage, but right now it seems like it'll be okay.
Well, the spells are kind of troubled right now.
Yeah, just Goblin Guide swinging. It'll draw David into a Savannah. Rough for Oliver that he can't swing with Swift Spear here.
Well, he can. I mean, just
sure.
Well,
Yeah, maybe he should.
David might respect the possibility of Fire Blast.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's not unreasonable. So one question I have is, Oliver didn't have land 3. Does that mean, is this Rift Bolt going to have to go at Thalia? I know he wants to get damage upstairs as much as possible.
I actually think the first thing he has to do is get the Deathrite Shaman off the table, because if he kills the Thalia, that puts the second creature in the graveyard.
Puts a creature in, puts a creature in the yard.
He can't really beat the Deathrite Shaman just gaining some life at this point. So I think the first order of business has to be getting Deathrite Shaman off the table, and then hoping you can get an answer for Thalia this turn or the following turn.
Can you instead, if you're Oliver, just not kill either of them and try to burn from 15?
I don't think so. Not with the board clogged up, and Oliver's hand's not very good to begin with. I would get the Deathrite Shaman off the table.
All right, well, draw for David. Remember, you got that free card off the Goblin Guide in Savannah. Still has 2 copies of Swords to Plowshares left, so has all of the creatures from Oliver covered. Looks. We'll see whether or not Thalia gets aggressive. It does a great job of keeping Goblin Guide at bay.
Well, David has to make the assessment of where is this Rift Bolt going, because if he leaves Thalia back to block and then the Thalia is killed by the Rift Bolt, he's just down 2 points of damage.
And I guess my question is, how important are 2 points of damage in this matchup from the Maverick side?
More than you would think, because David has no counter spells in his deck. He can't lock Oliver out of the game. He's got to eventually kill him through damage, and all those points of damage means you're shaving off draw steps somewhere down the line.
So on Oliver's side, Oliver takes 2, goes to 16. Of note on David's side, I want to point this out. He could have made a Savannah there, but he's just not making a land drop. Showing some respect, I think, to Price of Progress.
That's the card.
Oliver will take 1 to get rid of the Thalia. Means he gets to draw for the turn. So you mentioned this means Deathrite can gain an awful lot of life points. Swords to Plowshares will take care of Monastery Swift Spear. David trying to minimize the life gain Oliver gets there. Wants to get that before more prowess triggers happen.
Yep.
Draw for Oliver is Chain Lightning. And we may see this Deathrite also taken down.
Drawing Chain Lightning this turn makes Oliver's operations much better. If he didn't draw a 1-mana removal spell, then the Deathrite Shaman would have gotten a second activation. But since he did, this works out much better.
Well, Goblin Guide's going to swing here. David goes up to 17 off the Deathrite. Before that swing, Goblin Guide draws David another card in Verdant Catacombs. Then he'll Swords to Plowshares it. 17 to 20. David with a lot of cards, but they all seem to be lands flooding out here.
He's flooding out pretty badly.
And not playing any of them due to Price of Progress.
And I'm checking David's deck list. There is no copy of Batterskull.
So no Batterskull. Also of note, only 3 copies of Swords to Plowshares. He does have 3 Abrupt Decays left in his deck, but not a huge amount of removal. When you look at his life gain, it's Umezawa's Jite that he's going to have to go to. Play for the turn here from Oliver, Eidolon of the Great Revel. Great against David's hand of all lands means when David finally does draw a card to get into the game, he's going to take 2 damage off nearly everything.
And every shot that comes through from this Eidolon is really bad for David, because he's going to have to trigger this at least once to get anything going. And there's already a Price of Progress in Oliver's hand. David has nothing but non-basics in his hand. I suppose he can use his Verdant Catacombs to go get a basic, but that's still a point of damage. It looks like he's picked up, is that Green Sun Zenith? Or, yes, it is.
Well, cast Green Sun Zenith. You can, over Zenith here, you can pay too much for Green Sun Zenith and find something smaller. He'll go for 3. He still may find a 3, probably Knight of the Reliquary.
Yeah, that's a good one to go get here.
But it's not going to trigger Eidolon. Great draw for David. He does get Knight of the Reliquary in play. That will stop Eidolon from attacking for the time being. It's already a 4/4 due to those windswept heaths. Actually looks like a third land in the graveyard, actually, so it's 5/5 at the moment.
And this is so good for David, because this Knight of the Reliquary means that Oliver can attack, and David can also start spinning his non-basic lands into basics to get out of Price of Progress range as well.
Yeah. And how good was this draw? So if David hadn't hit Knight that turn, there was going to be a second Eidolon of the Great Revel for Oliver. And at that point, I'm not sure David can get back into the game. It's just 4 damage for all his spells. Oliver's going to play the second Eidolon anyways. But 5/5, I don't think that can get removed here.
And I don't know if he can run the second copy out there. I think Oliver needed to attack with the Eidolon and bolt the Knight of the Reliquary, because David can sit back behind this and play defense. Oliver needs to cast stuff, and he takes 4 damage a shot at this point.
If he swung bolted, he would get the Knight off the board, then he could play an Eidolon, and he'd be in a fine situation here.
You know, you're still in trouble if David has any big draw step, but now, I understand it's a lot of resources to give up to take the Knight off the table. But the problem is that Oliver's big trump card here is Price of Progress. And as long as Knight of the Reliquary stays in play, that price is just going to get worse and worse.
Well, and it's not like Oliver's going to push too much damage here. He's taking 4 off all his burn spells. So even he can't actually Lava Spike David, because David will take 3, Oliver will take 4. Oliver will lose to his own burn spells before he burns out David. That's assuming if David just sits back and does nothing.
Yes. No, this is a problematic spot. David also has, he can get rid of a Savannah, go get a Wasteland. Now he has a Wasteland as additional protection.
Yeah, lots of times you see players against price leave up a Wasteland on their side of the table so that they can Wasteland their own non-basic in the event of a Price of Progress.
So I usually advocate on the side of try not to burn out creatures with your burn spells, try to work through them. I think that last turn was a spot where Oliver needed to do the opposite, make some sort of effort to get Knight of the Reliquary off the table. Because it's kind of a win-win. If you get it off the table, great, your Eidolon's good to go and your Price of Progress is back online. And if David elects not to block, all right, well, 2 points of damage has gotten through, and that's great too.
And this is where I just don't see Oliver's line. All his burn spells hurt himself more than they hurt David.
And David's also at 17.
Right, so you can't burn yourself for 4 and your opponent for 3 when they're at 17. They'll win. You'll kill yourself first.
Yeah. So at this point, the cards that Oliver's drawing to that matter, or that are good draws from at this point, he has 1 main deck copy of Silveric Vortex. That's very helpful here.
That's also hurts both players. It hurts Oliver for 4, and then they both start taking 2. That's still more damage to Oliver than it is to David.
But he can work the game in a position where Fire Blast becomes a good draw. That's
okay,
that's
that's the payoff.
That's the workaround around Eidolon.
Seems like a really tough spot to be in. Eidolon is such a really sharp card to play with. It's so good, but if you play Eidolon on the wrong board, it can actually cost you the game.
Yep. Well, the second one is where you have to start really asking yourself. The first one, usually, it's going to be good for burn even if you're a little bit behind. The second one is where you start feeling the pinch of, I've only got access to so many spells.
You see another Green Sun Zenith draw for David. He can continue to cast spells that are Eidolon proof here.
Yeah, you can go get Knight number 2.
It's a pretty solid draw.
And then he can start going on the offense with 1 back on defense. And going on the offense is good for David as soon as he gets the opportunity to do so for the reasons you're mentioning. There's 2 Eidolons in play. Most of Oliver's draw steps are going to deal 4 points of damage to him. And every time you hit with Knight of the Reliquary, you're squeezing further and further the total number of cards Oliver gets to play in the game.
Now, going back to the turn when David plays the Knight of the Reliquary, that's not to say that Oliver would really do that well with that line. So say he swings Eidolon and David just says, okay, no blocks, I'll take 2. Mm-hmm. I mean, because that would be the heads-up play from David, right?
Yep.
Then we're more or less back here. Yeah, David's at 15 instead of 17, but Oliver's still pretty far behind.
But at least it's possible for David to draw pretty poorly and for you to crawl back in.
So then you just wouldn't play the second Eidolon on that board?
I would not.
Yeah, just this board state feels so bad. It seems like you can't go to it.
Because, with the Knight of the Reliquary in play, over an infinite timeline, David just wins the game. So you allow David, David's in a position where he wants to sit back and not really do anything. And with the second Eidolon in play, it becomes really attractive for him to sit back and not do anything because, eventually you're going to kill yourself off of Eidolon triggers.
Remember, Price of Progress, though, such a great card against Maverick. The deck actually only plays 1 basic. And that's the 1 forest you see in play. So if he wants to protect himself from Price, he has to do it by using Wastelands.
He can also go get Horizon Canopy and sack a Horizon Canopy. That's another way to get, a land off the table while still generating a little bit of value.
Yeah, we did see David already do that earlier. Now he's going to get a Wasteland. David here looks like he's no stranger to the burn matchup, knows that Price is the card he needs to fear.
Yeah, I mean, you could see the hesitation with him deploying even a 4th land when it was questionable whether or not he needed to.
But with 4 mana open, 2 Knights against 2 Eidolons, I like David's spot here. It seems hard for him to lose as long as he plays his cards right.
Well, the other side of this is David has to be worried about what happens if Oliver just chump blocks and then unleashes his hand. Because he's got, seriously, he's got Oliver between a rock and a hard place here, and you don't know what can happen. You never know what can happen if he starts jump blocking. At this point, David has probably protected himself enough from Price of Progress. In fact, Price of Progress only does 2 that he can afford to make this attack. But patience is a good virtue for David to have here because things are only going to get worse for Oliver.
Yeah, David has gotten these Knights all the way up to 8/8, it looks like. And if Oliver doesn't block one of them, David can Wasteland his own land and actually just present lethal here. So 1 or maybe 2 chump blocks for Oliver. We'll see which number he decides on. But yeah, cards in Oliver's hand, probably not enough to burn David out from 17. That would take... I don't know if he just mathematically has enough cards to pull that one off.
No, trying to noodle through what his draw steps can be. Even if they're all Fire Blasts, I think he's just short.
And one chump, Oliver down to 10. And David's going to have a question for judges here. It'll be 1 second.
Yep.
Things look great for McDarby right now. Looking like he will get the first game over Oliver Coffey.
It's a very commanding position. And even with David drawing a lot of lands this game, and part of the problem here is when Burns on the all creature route, that's the game plan Maverick can beat. When I'm playing against Maverick, for example, I go out of my way to side out as many creatures as possible because between Swords of Plowshares, their quality blockers, it's hard to push through damage on the ground.
Well, and it looks like Maverick's just somewhat soft to lava spikes. Their creatures are really disruptive, but they're not great on the power to mana cost ratio. They don't beat down very hard.
Neither the Reliquary is really their only way to speed the game up. I played games against Maverick where, I'm getting, they're winning the position battle the whole game, but it takes them 7 turns to kill me, and that's just too many draw steps when your deck can't gain life or counter spells.
And McDarby, having his question resolved, looks like he's just going to pass the turn back to Oliver. McDarby's going to have a lethal attack next turn, even through a jump blocker. And we'll see, Oliver's going to have to muster together 17 points of burn here. It's a tall order. With only 3 cards in his hand, he has Chain, Lightning Bolt, Price of Progress. He is short at the moment. Even if he gets all 6 damage off the price, which I can't imagine he will, that's still only 12, only 2 from the Eidolon.
Yeah, I think Oliver is in, again, rocking a hard place territory.
Draw for the turn, a basic mountain, that will not do it. On the other side of the bracket, we have David Strout versus Chris Marshall. That's our Elves player against Blue-Red Delver. Once again, he has taken it to 3 games at 1 apiece. They're sleeving up for game 3. And these players moving on to game 2. David McDarby and his Maverick deck up a game right now.
You get to see the power of Night of the Reliquary in the matchup is the one thing that really allows Maverick to speed things up. It gives them a lot of protection against Price of Progress, which is a vulnerability of the Maverick deck. And even with David kind of flooding out there a little bit, the liability of Oliver's creatures in the matchup came back to haunt him there. David did too much with his Swords to Plowshares. You can't really allow Maverick to interact like that. You had to strand them with as many dead cards as possible, and too many of David's defenses were able to line up with Oliver's offense.
All right, so before these players go to sideboard here, we're going to bring you back into the booth for a second for our second giveaway of the evening. Once again, you're watching the top 4 of the Star City Games Legacy Open here match between David McDarby and Oliver Coffey. McDarby up a game. Rules here, I'm going to ask you a question this round. If you believe you know the answer, tweet it at us. Make sure you have the hashtag SCG Premium on it. And once we finish this match, we will give away 6 months of Star City Games Premium. This question, we're going to look at McDarby's deck, his Maverick deck, looking for the name of a creature in the main, and it is I'll give you a pretty big hint, it's a legendary Kifkin. So, I believe there's only one of those in Magic.
Legendary Kifkin?
No, wait, that's not true. There's another one.
I imagine that's not true.
Yeah, I thought there's only one, but no. But anyway, there's only one in David's deck. If you believe you know his or her name, tweet it at us. And at the end of the round, we'll pick one of those answers.
So sideboard time.
Yeah, back into the match. All right, let's look first at David's deck.
Nile Spellbomb, a Pithy Needle, a Sword of Light and Shadow, 2 copies of Aethersworn Canis, a Burrington Forge Tender, a Containment, 2 copies of Containment Priest, a Choke, 2 copies of Zealous Persecution, a Cataclysm, 3 copies of Thoughtseize. I think the Zealous Persecutions are fine in this matchup. They give David another answer to Grim Lavamancer, and speeding up the clock potentially by a turn is really, really nice. The one Burrington Forge Tender is great. And, if David happens to draw that, he'll be really, really happy. I think the Sword of Light and Shadow is a pretty good sword target, too, because once you start connecting and gaining life, it's kind of hard for Burn to catch up.
So, Sword of Light and Shadow, Burrington Forge Tender.
The Zealous Persecution.
Zealous Persecution. On Oliver's side, he's got a lot of cards that tend to... Let's look at the cards I'd like here, and then tell me about them. Searing Blood, it's great against creature decks. I have to think he likes it against Maverick. There's a lot of X2s.
Great card.
Great card in the matchup. Dismember, it's a kill spell. It doesn't do any damage. So it's got to be a pretty good creature he's killing. Then again, without Dismember, he can't get rid of a Knight of the Reliquary.
I think that it's probably good enough to play. I don't like cards like this in the sideboard in general. I like my sideboard cards to either lock people out of the game or deal damage as they're providing utility. Dismember does neither, but because neither Reliquary is in the deck, I think it's worth bringing if you're going to have them.
All right, Sulfuric Vortex. He has 2 copies in the main. He can board all the way up to a full 4 copies of Vortex.
And I like it here. David's primary mode of interaction besides creature removal is gaining life. Umezawa's Jitte, Sword of Light and Shadow, Swords to Plowshares on his own large Knight of the Reliquary. I like Sulfuric Vortex. I also just like de-emphasizing the creatures in general because David's deck is so good at blocking that I'm happy to bring in some of the kind of sketchier cards.
That's one here, Ensnaring Bridge. David is playing a deck that wins through the attack step. If Oliver empties his hand, can that get there?
Strongly dislike. David's got way too many ways to answer it between Abrupt Decay and a main deck Kasali Pride Mage. I think Ensnaring Bridge you can only bring in when you're confident it's going to lock the other person out or you can't win the fight fair. So against decks like Reanimator and Sneak and Show where you just have to cheat it, I think against David's deck there's too many things that can go wrong. So, I would actually bring in Relic of Progenitus before I brought in Ensnaring Bridge.
So what kind of decks, walking back here, does Ensnaring Bridge lock out of the game?
A lot of builds of Temur Delver can operate around it. Sneak and Show, sometimes Reanimator, a couple other random decks. But I don't like it bringing it against creature decks that have some ways to remove it. I don't like Ensnaring Bridge against Death and Taxes very much. I don't like it against Maverick. I think that too many things can go wrong with it. And, you get into these spots a lot with Burn where you get in your shots, the other person taking it over the game, and does your draw step provide wins? And when you have things like Ensnaring Bridge and Dismember clogging up your draws, it means you're often losing those kind of close games.
Yeah, it seems, what is it? One of the things I hear a lot with Burn is that if you're boarding more than 5 cards, you're probably making your deck worse.
Well, it doesn't, if you're going,
if you're boarding out, if you're boarding, how about this? If you're boarding in more than like 4 non-damage cards.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go to town bringing in Smash the Smithereens and
Sure.
Searing Bloods, but I don't want to be messing around too much with Ensnaring Bridges and the like.
It is certainly a deck where you can over sideboard. We'll see the plan that Oliver's on here. He's on the play game 2, number 6 seed. It's going to start it on a Grim Lavamancer. Seems like a great answer for a turn 1 Mother of Runes or something of that sort.
This card's awesome on the play. I mean, if David doesn't have a Source of Plowshares, it's pretty hard for him to operate. If I was in Oliver's position, the first cards that I would sideboard out, for the record, are the Monastery Swiftspear and the 4 Goblin Guides. Even on the play, too many things can go wrong with those cards.
And he'll make that one. We'll pass back over to McDarby. Had some decisions. It seems like already on turn 1, going to start on Marsh Flats. You've seen his hand. A fair number of lands, 2 Knights of the Reliquary, a Dryad Arbor, a Stoneforge Mystic.
And already just a great start for Oliver being able to go into his turn with Grim Lavamancer. You can see the curve here, Stoneforge Mystic and Knight of the Reliquary, but that curve's not great against an active Lavamancer.
Yeah. The fact that David has fetch lands into Knight means Knight will probably not be able to be killed by Oliver. But then again, David is dealing himself points of damage, so that's a boon for Oliver in that sense.
So I'm a little surprised there for Oliver to not deploy the fetch land there and not attack, because it means he's committed to casting a spell. If you have a fetch land in play, if David just says go again, you don't have to cast anything if you don't want to.
So you either attack or you play a fetch land, but
right.
you either want to leave back the activation or you attack.
I want to play Basic Mountain and attack, or play fetch land and say go.
Now, if you have Lightning Bolt here, what about play Basic Mountain, leave up Lightning Bolt, or some other, and then do that and Grim Lavamancer?
Then play the fetch land so you're not committed to bolting if you don't want to.
Sounds good. We'll see what his line is here. We go over to David on turn 2.
Now, there is some, sort of down the line argument about there's utility to leaving the Scalding Tarn in your hand because it gives you more flexibility with Searing Blaze if that comes up. But unless the Searing Blaze is in Oliver's hand, I don't think that's worth, the tempo he's giving up. And see, this is exactly the dilemma here. If Oliver plays the fetch land, then David can't cast this. Now, the Searing Blood makes this really nice. But if there's a fetch land, David probably just has to say go.
Well, Searing Blood, you're right. That's the play from Oliver. So he'll get David down to 16 on that exchange. Now he plays a fetch land, Goblin Guide the draw. He's going to play Goblin Guide. It's going to swing in for 2. Grim Lavamancer back on defense. He will draw David a Wasteland, but David drops to 14.
Still, very good start here for Oliver. He's got to be happy with how this game's going.
Has both Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning in his hand. And it is interesting, right now the Grim Lavamancer actually hasn't done any damage yet.
Yeah. So with the play last turn, Oliver ended up, the way it nets out, he ended up giving up 1 point of damage.
See if that one catches up to him. David's down to 13. He does have one activation here in his graveyard and another one at the ready with Lightning Bolt and a fetch land. So Grim should be doing a great job of getting damage in the upcoming turns.
It also just contorts David's play quite a bit too. He can't just play Stoneforge Mystic.
Right, he may have to go for Knight of the Reliquary here. That's a pretty beefy blocker. It stops the Goblin Guide, which maybe David's forced into making that play.
It's just not proactive. The Knight's fine, but it's not a long-term solution to what's going on the board. It's just a big body, and David needs to be able to push something forward or gain some life here because he doesn't have that much time.
That'll be a fetch from David. He goes down to 12. Gonna fetch up a dual. A lot of fetch lands. David's done some damage to himself, but he will have a large Knight of the Reliquary as the bonus here. You see, yeah, 3 fetch lands, 1 for each of David's land drops. And see if Oliver burns on end step here. He has an option of Price of Progress. He can also just use Grim Lavamancer. Looks like he's gonna price here. Now, that does mean he's sacrificing a Grim Lavamancer activation.
Which I think this is kind of fine either way because
looks like he just has him, doesn't he? It's 4 damage here from Price. Untaps Chain Lightning, Lightning Bolt, activate Grim. That's 8 more. That should just be 12. So hard to argue with a line that's lethal.
Lethal. Although it's lethal the other way also. I don't know why that mountain would be in the graveyard.
Nope, other card goes to the graveyard. The Price does. David down to 8. Coffey's gonna draw, and we see both. There we go. Chain Lightning is 5. Lightning Bolt is 2. Grim Lavamancer. That puts him to 0, and we're on to game 3. And pretty good start there for Oliver. It was, to me, that showcases the strength of Searing Blood.
Unchecked Grim Lavamancer on the play for burn. Maverick's not beating that very often.
Yeah. Well, but if you think about it, that was just a shock. It never attacked. It activated once.
Well, the problem is that David can't, he can't cast his Deathrite Shaman on turn 1. And he does a Stoneforge Mystic. He ends up dying within his hand. It's not just about whether or not the Lavamancer is getting activated. It just so many of David's lines of play there are shut off, and David did nothing of substance until his turn 3 Knight of the Reliquary and did not get to untap.
Yeah, Oliver, that is a turn 4 kill.
Yep.
And so that's strong enough there. If you have enough of those Lightning Bolt style cards, whether they're Lava Spike, Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, you can get these really fast starts.
Now, on the other side of this, I think, I don't know if Oliver's really going back to his sideboard right now, but I think that he needs to get these Goblin Guys out of his deck. I think they're already sketchy when he's on the play. On the draw, it's all sorts of trouble. If they're in his opening hand, they might be okay, and if they're his draw steps past the first turn or two, they are often just blanks.
Yeah, on the play, I can see keeping them in. There is the argument that turn 1 Goblin Guide on the play is just too strong of an opening to not play. But you're right, on the draw, it seems unlikely that they'll do more than 2 damage. I can see a lot of situations where they do 0.
Yep.
Update from our bracket. Into the finals, 2-1. Well, Chris Marshall's not going to be able to dodge these Blue-Red Delver deck twice in a row. David Stroud moves on to the finals where he awaits the winner of this match. We are on to game 3. McDarby on the play here. Who will face the Blue-Red Delver player? McDarby, your number 2 seed, playing Maverick. Oliver Coffey with Burn. We are underway turn 1. Savannah from McDarby. He does have Swords to Plowshares. From Oliver, it's going to be a turn 1 Goblin Guide. It's not going to get damage. It's going to draw David a Windswept Teeth and probably eat a Swords to Plowshares.
And David with a really nice curve lined up. He already has turn 3 Knight of the Reliquary ready to go.
Oliver up to 21. David at I believe, a healthy 20 life. I go back, David. Draw for turn, Deathrite Shaman. Another good card in this matchup, source of life gain. One thing that Oliver does have going for him is he has 2 copies of Eidolon of the Great Revel along with a Searing Blood. So if David doesn't get onto the board too quickly, Oliver can make some progress with these Eidolons.
Yep. It's definitely a solid hand. But the opening sequence there for Oliver was really bad. David got to draw a card and cash in a Swords to Plowshares for interaction.
It does. I wonder if we're going to run into the issue again where Oliver sticks a Eidolon, but then David gets a Knight of the Reliquary, and they look at each other for a while. We saw in game 1 that that's not a spot where Burn wants to be.
Well, it's a lot more likely that Oliver can kill the Knight of the Reliquary straight away.
It is only going 2-2 right now. Fetch land represents a possible 3-3. Deathrite Shaman, the play for David. We go back over to Oliver, draws another fetch land. He'll go to 20. And that'll be Eidolon of the Great Revel. He'll get one of those in play as early as he can. And this will give David a chance to put Knight of the Reliquary down before, on a relatively even board. I mean, a board I'd say actually that David's ahead on.
Yeah, and not killing the Deathrite Shaman here is going to open up a pretty potent line of play here where David is going to be able to cast Knight of the Reliquary and play a Wasteland on top of putting this Windswept Heath into the graveyard. So he's going to have the possibility of getting up to a 5-5, which means Oliver's not touching it for the rest of the game unless he finds his 1 Dismember.
It does have a copy in hand of a lot of good burn spells. We see Searing Blood, Eidolon of the Great Revel, Fire Blast among his different options. Draw for the turn, I believe from David, was Umezawa's Jite.
And now David with a really potent line here. I mean, if he can make a Knight that he can't, that, you know,
If he
Oliver
makes an
can't
unkillable creature and puts a Jite on it, I don't want to.
Oliver's on Sulfuric Vortex or bust.
I'll see McDarby gonna. Oliver willing to bring lots of fetch lands to the table. David will exile 1. He'll make Knight of the Reliquary. That puts David down to 17. And you called it. Here's Wasteland. That protects Knight. It can get all the way up to a 5-5 if it need be. And Oliver may have to Fire Blast it.
Well, I think
and burn it. You know, Searing Blood it and Fire Blast it if things get too bad. And even then, that might not be enough.
I think that Oliver doesn't have to do anything too drastic this turn. He can just Searing Blood the Deathrite Shaman and pass the turn back.
Okay, and that is going to be the play. Searing Blood. Oliver takes 2. He goes down to 18. McDarby, he's going to take 3 off the Searing Blood, 2 more off the Eidolon. He'll probably go down to 12 here. And 2 more Eidolons in Oliver's hand. A little too much of a good thing. And no swing from Oliver there.
Well, I mean, he's looking at a 3-3 with the ability to get to a 5-5, so nothing to be gained.
Oh, right. It's on. You're absolutely right. No swing there. Hasn't aired Mesa untapped there.
And now here's the thing. David can go for just Jite Equip. Just jam. And Oliver can Fire Blast to get it off the table, and that's a really big tempo swing on the other side. Or he can try to play it safe and play Deathrite Shaman, but you know, there's always the risk of how long are you willing to wait when Oliver can untap and kill you? When if he draws Sulfuric Vortex, all of a sudden you can't even do anything with your Jite.
So Jite Equip is only soft to Fire Blast, but it's very soft to Fire Blast.
David might just lose the game because he takes 2 off of casting the Jite. It's his whole turn. Oliver gets to untap and attack for 2. He's still got a mana left over at least to play with. All of a sudden, Price of Progress is exposed because you have 3 non-basic land tapped. It's
all sorts of bad.
Yeah.
We'll see. Here's the Umezawa's Jite for David McDarby. He's going to take 2, go to 12.
He can also just play Jite and say go. That's the more conservative route.
Wasteland, and he's going to try to equip here, and this could be disaster for David.
Yeah.
Not only would Oliver get to Fire Blast here, but if he top decks a mountain, he gets to play a second Eidolon onto a board where he's winning. I just don't know if I see David coming out of it.
Well, the other option here is David can again just say go. He doesn't have to make a move. Does not have to make a move.
You're right. So he can equip it here and not make a move. That means that his Knight, if it's untapped, can make itself a 5-5. And it looks like Oliver, this is not the right, this sequencing of it is not going to work out.
No, this is a disaster because now David gets to go sacrifice one of his lands, go get a Wasteland,
or a fetch land, yeah.
Yeah, or something like that. He needed to wait for David to attack or say go, but with the Knight still active, David's able to make this survive, and now the Jitte is going to be on it, and there's not a lot to be done.
Yeah, he needed to wait until David attacked. And you think if David's going to play any equip in one turn, David would have attacked.
I don't think it's 100%. I think that if David is mindful of how bad Fire Blast is for him, he may just say go.
Okay, and that's pretty reasonable.
But now this is great because David gets to keep the Knight alive. The Fire Blast isn't doing anything. He's getting additional insurance against Price of Progress, and then next turn he's going to have a huge creature ready to go.
Fire Blast Knight is a 5/5. And that's a tough move for Oliver because on the board it's already a pretty bad situation for him. And now Oliver draws 1 land in play. David's at 12. Oliver can put him to 10. But that's not going to do it just yet.
Yeah, I guess it's a 6/6 now, and I like David getting the Wasteland and wastelanding his own land because he knows Oliver has 1 Dismember in the sideboard. So if he just gets a fetch land, it's a 5/5. The 1 Dismember is still an out.
So he's making a 6/6. That should have it covered from all angles. You see Oliver's hand, Rift Bolt, Fire Blast, Eidolon. That's not going to do anything against Jitte. He casts Rift Bolt, and David is going to get Jitte counters. That should be enough to send him into the finals.
Yes. With 1 land, there's no possibility Sulfuric Vortex dismembers off the table. There's no Smash to Smithereens in Oliver's deck. His goose is cooked.
There's not even a block and dismember that you have to play around. I think, there is a world where Oliver can just leave up mountain, say go, and bluff having a dismember and a block, and maybe David respects the bluff enough to give Oliver some time to draw something.
Mm-hmm. But, I mean, the first order of business here is just going to be getting in a big hit. Burden players often play it out from a position. I'm happy to concede.
Yeah, he got a Jitte counter. He's like, okay, that's the game.
It's like the alternate win condition. It's like Battle Wits. Connect with a creature with Umezawa's Jitte on it. All right, fine, you win, man. We both teams play hard. We move on to the next game.
You see here David wastelanding all his own lands away. Left with just a basic. Knight is an 8/8 with a Jitte on it. It's going to swing in. That puts Oliver at 9. 2 Jitte counters on. David at 10 at a virtual 14, having a huge creature that Oliver won't be able to deal with. It does not have a card in his 75 that answers.
And I like David not even trying to deploy any more creatures here because you don't want to turn on Searing Blazes and Searing Bloods. Just let this play out the way that it is.
Yeah, there aren't even Smash to Smithereens to take care. There's no artifact removal in the 75 for Oliver. The Jitte is just going to work. Oliver actually has to cast his own Rift Bolt. That will deal more damage to himself.
Mm-hmm.
David passes. Rift Bolt will go at David. David will go down to 7. Oliver down to 7 as well.
Tie game.
If only. David, a virtual 11. That's going to be too much for Oliver to come back from. You draw Price of Progress. That won't be it. David McDarby, 2-1, moves into the finals.
Some very good play there from David. I mean, it's simple to say, but I think David understood how to approach the matchup.
Yeah, you saw him very aggressively wastelanding himself to get out of Price of Progress range. Really balanced his Knights of Reliquary well. Also, when to make one, when to just kind of set it up so that it had enough toughness to survive whatever Oliver could throw at it.
Yep, and I think for Oliver, not the ideal post-board configuration here against Maverick. Part of the reason I like bringing in the Relics, too. You just get to cut some creatures that aren't very good in the matchup anyway, and Relic is very helpful against Knight of the Reliquary.
Absolutely. So that will put David